Shabbat Tov. I want to talk about a few things. We've been talking a lot about relationships between husband and wives and marriage a little bit, but there's other types of relationships as well, of course, the mitzvot in the Torah. And we're not going to go into the greatest detail, but specifically with this group, there are sometimes questions which come up, which are unique to unique situations. The other relationships which you have a mitzvah in the Torah about, who can tell me? What other relationships in the Torah are mentioned specifically, explicitly, that you have a mitzvah? Right, there's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? You love your neighbor as yourself. So that's everybody in the world, every Jew, at least, right? And then we said that to love your wife is an application of that. Perhaps the most intense love of your friend. Re'ah means friend. Sometimes it's translated as of your neighbor, but Re'ah means friend. Love your neighbor. And we saw many times, Rabbi Kiva says, he applies this pasuk of Hafta l'reacha kamocha to the situation of a husband and wife. But what other relationships are mentioned in the Torah that we have mitzvot about? Kibbud Avein, excellent. Honoring your father and mother. Honoring your father and mother, that's a relationship which what else? Children. You have to raise them. That's right. You have to educate your children. We say it in the Shema a couple times a day, right? Shinantam levanecha, teach them to your children. And the second parsha it says, Vilimadtem otam et bneichem, you should teach them to your children. So that's it doesn't say love. It doesn't say love by parents either. It says kavod. And here it's teaching. So there's different aspects of the relationship, but for sure that's a relationship which is explicitly mentioned. What else?
I mean, it's also your neighbor, your friend, but you're not supposed to be jealous.
Right. There are many mitzvot between all Jews, and you're not allowed to oppress and to steal, but the specific relations that are mentioned. So there's for sure parents and children are mentioned explicitly.
There's also the legal mitzvot about false witnesses.
Many mitzvot about interpersonal relations with every Jew. But there's even a pasuk which says you should take care of the if you see your enemy. His donkey is overburdened or the opposite, right? So, but that's variable. It's not a specific person. Hopefully you don't have too many enemies, anyways. Yibum, the brother. There's a relation. It's a chiyuv to your brother. If he dies without any children, after getting married, he doesn't have any children, so you have to take over. It's called levirate marriage in English, right? So we have a sibling relationship, which is unique. There are many siblings in the Torah. Parsha Sefer Bereshit, which we're starting now, is full of family relationships. Not just Avram and Sarah, and Yitzchak and Rivka, and Yaakov, and Rachel and Leah, but also there's brothers, Yitzchak and Yishmael. This week's Parsha, next week, Yaakov and Esav. After that, the siblings. 4 parshas out of the 12 is all about the relationship between the brothers of Yosef and the infighting between them. So there's brothers, parents, children. What else?
There's
a ger. The ger, the Atom and the Almanah, specific subgroups which need particular attention. Very good.
Well, what are we looking specifically?
So what I'd like to do is speak about some of the other relationships now, not necessarily husband and wife. 2 that recently came up, and very, very interesting question relating to a ger and kibbud avayim. So kibbud avayim is an essential mitzvah. It's the 10 Commandments, and very, very important. Why is it part of the 10 Commandments? Well, it doesn't say love your brother in the 10 Commandments. That doesn't say teach your children in the Ten Commandments, specifically Kibbud Av V'Em. Not only that, it's part of the first half of the Ten Commandments. The first 5 generally are associated with between man and God, as opposed to mitzvot between man and man. The second half are all interpersonal, whereas, right, don't steal, don't adulter, don't bear false witness, and don't covet. All those are between man and man. And the first half, believe in God, don't have idols, keep the Shabbat, don't, swear falsely in God's name. All those are between man and God. The one exception, strange exception, is the 5th. If we divide the 10 into 5 and 5, it's not clear, but there are 2 tablets and 10 commandments, or 10 words, 10 matters. Anyways, the 5th one is to honor your parents, Kibbud Av V'Em. It's a little surprising that is in the first half, in the between man and God category, as opposed to the between man and man category. Your parents, sometimes we treat them like gods, but they're people too. Parents are people too. As you get older, you realize how much more people they are than you maybe thought they were when you were 5 years old. You thought, oh, my dad is superpower. And then you get a little older, and then you think, oh, how dumb he is. And then you get a little older, and all of a sudden he gets smarter again. It's interesting how that works. Our perspective colors our relationship. But yes, so many of the poskim commentators on the Torah say that the reason why Kibbud Av V'Em is in the first half is because usually your father and your mother are instrumental in your education process. They're a link in the chain. It's your connection to the chain of tradition, going back to Sinai, is when it's a family tradition, right? Jewish is sort of this strange mix between of a religion and an ethnicity and a peoplehood. Of course, what makes it interesting is when you have a case like Gior, when you have conversion, somebody who doesn't have a Jewish lineage, he can join and become a Jew. So we see that it's not purely race, but it is maybe more in the direction of religion. So we're not going to get to the bottom of this right now, defining what is Judaism. It's quite a complicated issue. But when it comes to the mitzvah of Kibbud Av V'Em, many of the poskim say, well, the reason why Kibbud Av is so central, so important, is because they are, in many ways, your chain towards God. They're the ones who teach you about God. They teach you about Torah, right? As we mentioned, you have to teach your children Torah. V'shinantim levanecha. There's a mitzvah of a parent to teach their children, and it's not only in Shema, but particularly which holiday? Is it about teaching your children? It's not mentioned explicitly, but the 4 sons around the Pesach Seder, the mitzvah is Higata levincha b'yom ha'lemor. You should teach your children at this day the story of coming out of Egypt. So the passing on the tradition to children is a central part, central role of parents. And so it makes sense that when the mitzvah is to honor your parents going upward, back in the chain, this might be associated with the fact that they're the ones who educated you. They're the ones who are handing over the Torah to you. That's Torah that's related to God. In other words, we're honoring our parents not only because they were nice to you, but because they're your teachers, and they are like they're like your masters and educators, and they bring you into the tradition which they give you. So what makes it interesting is when you have. Now that's not the only reason to honor your mother and father. Honoring your mother and father can stem, as other commentators say, from a basic idea that you should give thanks, hakarat tov, to recognize someone who did something nice for you. Most basic principle, according to some thinkers, It's one of the most basic moral features that we have to be aware of, is to appreciate the good that is done to us. Some people say it's a major feature of our relationship to God. That our foundation of our relationship with God should be stemmed from Hakarat Tov, recognizing God created the world, He created us, He gave us life, and this is such a central part in our relationship. We have to train ourselves to not be ingrates, to recognize the goodness done. Now, one of my Rosh Yeshiva, he spoke quite vocally against this principle. Rav Yehuda Amital. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he said, with all due respect, the great rabbis in the Musar schools who taught about the centrality of we should really be training ourselves to not be ungrateful, to recognize and be thankful to somebody who does a basic morality. Is if somebody gives you good, you should thank them. You should feel indebted to them and dependent on them, and that should color your relationship. And they said, well, this is the basic idea of appreciating God. We have to be thankful to Him for what He gave us. And he said, after the Holocaust, this can no longer be the linchpin, the foundational idea in our relationship to God. Very powerful words. Obviously, bad things happen to good people, and it's very hard to say that you should. Our relationship with God is based on the fact that He gives us such goodness, because sometimes He doesn't. And of course, He's not giving up on God. He's a great religious thinker and master and teacher and a very religious man. But he just thought that the weight given to this idea, as opposed to other religious ideas, has to change. After the Holocaust, we can no longer ignore that and say, oh, of course, God gives us all these good things, so we have to be thankful to Him. That's the foundation stone upon which all of our religious lives is built. He says, no, we have to build it on other things. There's other ways of relating to God, not just based on the good things that He does for us and how we have to be so ever grateful for the goodness. Now, Rav Yehuda Amital, of blessed memory, he also said Ashrei every day. Of course, it's part, right? In Ashrei, you get up to the letter Tet. Tov Hashem lakol, rachamav al kol ma'asav. Many days I've had trouble saying that pasuk. When I was a mourner, maybe when I was dealing with a very difficult thing, tragedy that happens, when you're dealing with some little baby that gets cancer or is suffering, and there's nobody else to blame. So it's a very, very strong statement. We say it every day, just as we're saying, God is good to all of us. Tov Hashem lakol, that Rachamav and His mercy has done kol ma'asav, and everything they've created. Well, it's true, of course. He created life, created the universe, and gave us life, and He continues to give us life every day, and we have so much to be grateful for. It's not that it's untrue, but it's hard to feel that sometimes. And so there's some days where you just are feeling the pain, feeling the suffering, and it's hard to see the goodness. And then what Rav Amital was saying is that can happen not only on a personal scale for you, having a bad day or having a hard experience of calamity, of tragedy, of some things are harder beyond expression. You could just imagine what the families are going through now. We're dealing with a hostage situation, and it's cruel and gruesome details of what was done, and you're supposed to turn around and say, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba. May God's great name be blessed. Tremendous requirement of faith to bless God. When you ask yourself, well, why didn't he stop this terrible tragedy? Now, it's true, there is a stage when someone's loved one dies where you don't say Kaddish. At the very first stage after the deceased dies, before the burial, you're not expected to say Kaddish. You're not expected to do any mitzvot. You are patur from all the mitzvot in the Torah. Status, who knows what that status is called? Someone who's mourning his dead relative is called, what's that in Hebrew? A mourner? Avel, Avelut, right. But there's a stage before Avelut. Onen, exactly. Onen is a pre-Avelut stage. That first, it means somebody who is basically crying or in a state of weeping. That is a halachically defined stage in the mourning process. Before you even get, there's lots of rules of mourning and what prayers you say, what laws you have to keep. The first stage, that only starts after the burial. Before that, there's a stage of aninut, it's called. Aninut is a stage of perhaps weeping or however you translate it. It's hard to translate it.
Isn't the same word they use for Yom Kippur?
No, that's it with an ayin. That's inui. That's inui. That's suffering. That's depriving oneself is inui. It's usually the way we translate it for Yom Kippur. This is with an aleph. It's a different Hebrew meaning, so that stage you don't have to say. You're not expected to say Kaddish. You're not expected even to do mitzvot because you're of course you're in shock, but also the way Rav Soloveitchik describes it, he says it's a stage where you can't just have a regular relationship with God, and where you, of course, have to be thankful and have to appreciate all the good things that He has for you. Pretty much what Rav Amital was suggesting is that post-Holocaust, we are all, to some extent, on a national scale, post-trauma. And in that post-trauma world, we can't just have the same relationship we had for the previous 1,000 years before there was a Holocaust. In some ways, you could say that we're all now somewhat still reeling from the horrible massacre. Many people have been comparing it to the horrors of the Holocaust, and good and rightly so. In some, obviously, it's not at that same scale, and we do have a state, and we're not helpless, and we're fighting. But in terms of the gruesome horrors which they perpetrated, including the most dramatic and the most hard thing to imagine is that they actually, until today, I'm sorry to bring it up, but there's hundreds of victims which have not been identified 3 weeks later because they burnt them. They burnt them more than to a crisp, to ashes. And there's not even a tooth left, or they're I don't know what if they're ever gonna be able to identify any of these hundreds of victims, because they basically created a crematoria right here in Medinat Yisrael. It's on. Yeah. They gathered the bodies together and they burnt them, and they burnt for hours. Yeah, purposefully. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Gathered the bodies.
Yes, and set fire to them. And some of them were in the mamad, some of them were gathered. All different kinds of horrible situations. In any case, and of course the people who we know are alive, the hostages, there's no avilut because they're still alive, but they're just living in unspeakable horror. So it's very hard to say, oh, God is good and demand of them. to say the Kaddish, may God's great name be sanctified, and so there is a stage where just dwelling on that, or for sure making that the linchpin of your relationship with God. Rabbi had other suggestions instead. It's not like he said we give up God, but there is another mode of religious life, which is, he develops it at length, that even though he himself persecutes me, hein yikteleni lo ayachel, quoting a pasuk in Iyov, another good example. Somebody who suffered on horrible sufferings and yet did not lose his faith. He asked difficult questions, but he remained faithful. Iyov, in the end of the day, passes the test. But in any case, Iyov was not saying, I have to be so thankful to Hashem for all the goodness that he did to him. 50 chapters where he describes the horrible punishments that he has to persevere. And he said, perhaps an Iyov-like type of theology is what we need in our day and age, post-Holocaust. And there's something to think about that. I wasn't really going to talk about this. This is not a class in theology. We're not talking about philosophy. We're talking about relationships. Where I'm taking this, though, and I mean, I'm glad I'm talking about it, gets it off my chest. And it's really, it's something that we can never forget. What's still going on. The soldiers are fighting tooth and nail now to hopefully get out those hostages. And Bezrat Hashem should guide them and somehow bring solace to these families of these victims who were not saved. But I'm taking it back to what we started with. We started with different relationships, and we focused in a little bit on the relationship of a father and mother. And we said that there's two basic directions, the two major explanations of why Kibbud Av V'Em is so central, why is it in the Ten Commandments, and why do we have to honor our parents. So the first, we mentioned it second, but the first basic idea is we owe, let's start with the first one. The first one we said is that, well, they're your link to God. They teach you about God. They bring you into the tradition. If your parents were Jewish and your grandparents were Jewish, and they teach you Torah Tzivalana Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov, the first verse parents are supposed to teach your children is that God, Moshe taught us a Torah. So the parents have the mitzvah to teach you Torah, and so your parents are your link into tradition. That's one reason why Kibbud Av V'Em is so central. Maybe that's why it's in the first half of the Ten Commandments. But then there's a second reason. And the second reason that many of the commentators describe is Hakarat HaTov. That you have to recognize the good. And this is a basic element of Judaism, even if it's not the major element of Judaism, according to the theology we were just discussing now, post-Holocaust. And at some point, you cannot recognize the good things, which it's not the only way why we recognize God, but it definitely is a central theme that we should not be ungrateful. If someone does something good for you, you have to be grateful. And your parents do wonderful things for you, even if they're not Jewish. They didn't bring you into the tradition. They may even be Jewish and not bring you into the tradition, because they, for whatever reason, they didn't do their job of teaching you Torah. Maybe in most cases it's not their fault. They never were taught themselves. For whatever reason, you still have to be grateful because they brought you into the world, biology. They changed your diapers in most cases. They gave you food and drink until you were able to care for yourself. Somebody had to care for you. We're not like foals or different types of animals that they're born and they stand on their feet 30 seconds later. Human children need a lot of care, and usually it's the parents that you have so much to be grateful to your parents for, let alone what they gave you psychologically, love, tender love and care, and making hot chocolate for you when you feel down, and teaching you how to fish, fine, they don't teach you Torah, but they teach you how to read and write. They put you to school in which you learned how to read and write. So there's so much hakarat tov you have to have for your parents, even if you don't have that first element of that they taught you Torah, or that they're your link in the chain. So most poskim can understand that there is a level of kibud avaim which you must fulfill with your parents, even if they didn't teach you Torah, and even if they're not even Jewish. In general, the mitzvot are for Jews, between Jews and Jews. All the 613 category, the mitzvot and the Torah are devised as the relationships between the Jewish people. So it's a little more complicated when you start to say that the mitzvah of kibbud avayim refers also to parents that are not Jewish, because that would be a very big exception to the rule. 613 govern the rules within Jews. But let's say it's not midoraita, or it's not on the same level. There still is a mitzvah of kibbud avayim on some level to show to be grateful to your parents who brought you up and took care of you, at least on the basic level, at some level. There's always something to be thankful for. And hakarat tov is a major theme in kibbud avayim, as well as respecting them for giving you your heritage and your tradition. Okay, one second. Dimitri, you wanted to ask a question. Dimitri, thank you for waiting. I just wanted to finish the thought. And present what I presented was that kibbud avayim comes from two major themes, and we described hakarat tov and heritage.
Yeah. I just had a comment. Well, you might notice that depending on how you raise your hand or how a student raises his hand, that means like how close this is to topic or how much important it is. So, for example, once I put my hand down, it means that the comment is no longer relative to where we went. So that's why I put my hand down. But still, I'm going to say it since you asked.
Okay.
I wanted to comment on the whole relationships topic, and that was regarding the Simchat Torah. It feels very much like Ukraine now, except that our enemies much more cruel to us, and our people much more kind to us.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. It's a pretty horrible war over there too. You're right. Israel has maybe a lot to learn. We perhaps I've heard a lot of criticism of the Israeli government. We all understand why they didn't come out as pro-Ukraine as we could have, because we need Russians because of Syria and they're in charge, and we need to have freedom of the war. The army should be able to attack in Syria, and that's under. We need Russian permission for whatever reasons. If it's a moral principle of good versus evil, of the right against an attacking, invading, illegitimate, unprovoked war, by all means we should have been more vocal and more generous in our help for the Ukrainians. The comparison is a good one, and you're right. Of course, the barbarous activities are hard to compare to anything. But okay, thank you for that insight. Yes, you just came from there, right? So you're very aware of the horrible attack of the Russians on the Ukrainians, for sure. Okay, other comments, Quest, please.
I was just going to note that the opposite of kibbud avayim, you have disrespect or even violence.
Yes.
I mean, that's punishable by death.
Right. So forbidden by the Torah. That's right. That's right. There's not only a positive commandment, there's also a negative commandment. You're not allowed to hit your parents, drawing blood, curse your parents. That's right. That relationship is very powerful. So now there are situations which are very extreme, where you don't have the first reason or the second reason, or you have some combination of them where, for example, what if your parents abused you? There are some kids who were not taken care of by their parents. They were sent to foster homes and whatever, and they never really did you anything. Well, they did bring you into the world, as I said, biology, but beyond that, there's not that much there. It could be the exact opposite. There's some parents that hurt you. It can hurt you physically, they can hurt you psychologically, and there's abusive parents. And there's a discussion about when requirement of kibbud avayim end. So, there's a lot to talk about. We have 5 minutes left. So we're not going to talk about all the details of that. But, a general rule of thumb is that, if it's going to continually hurt you right now, there is room to say that you don't have to put yourself under that duress if it's hurtful to you right now because of whatever psychological reasons. But then we have the other case as well. As I said, maybe they educated you. They educated you partially. They educated you and they taught you things which are harmful to you. They brought you up, maybe teaching you wrong values and morals. It's been popular in the recent days. A number of individuals who grew up in Hamas or in Gaza and were being brainwashed pretty much to be murderous thugs, and they managed to release themselves from it, or even not in Gaza, but even in other countries where they were just brought up in Islamic homes, jihadist homes, and somehow they were able to extricate themselves from this ideology, from this upbringing, and educate themselves, and are now very vocal about saying how we got out. We realize now that this is a murderous ideology, and there's right and wrong, and this is just wrong, and it's not necessarily a case of Islam versus another religion. It's this type of Islam that particularly is immoral and jihadist, as I said. So it's complicated. Kibbud avayim in general, even if you have a good Jewish upbringing, and your parents are very nice to you, it's so complicated because we all have to grow up and become independent, and there's no degrees given out for being a parent. You don't have to go to school, and sometimes the parents will say the wrong thing, and they do damage you, and they can hurt you. It can be hurtful, maybe more hurtful than others, because they're your parents, and you expect so much of them, and rightly so. But so the relationship is very complicated. But halachically, getting back to what we wanted to talk about, let me give you an example of an amazing question I got from a convert. I used to study here, and he is a ger. He converted because his father was Jewish and his mother was not. His mother's a Christian until today, and he's visiting his parents, and they're discussing the war, the horrible attack in recent times, and of course that's what's going on. By all means, that's the only natural thing to talk about it. And whenever he talks to his mother about the events, she crosses herself, as many Christians do. It's like, God forbid, or God should save us, and that's a little bit problematic. We know that Christianity is the most simple way to understand it halachically is that it's considered avodah zarah. It's much more complicated, of course, but they do believe in the Trinity. Most Christians believe that Jesus, a man, was actually a god. This is avodah zarah as well. And so here this fellow is thinking to himself, well, I'm talking to her because I'm trying to do kibbud avayim. She wants to talk to me. I want to talk with her as well. And I don't want to, be disrespectful. But in his mind, he's thinking, because he's a halachic Jew now, he's learned, and knows that you're not allowed to aid and abet a sin. What's that called? To cause someone else to sin? There's a prohibition in the Torah to cause someone else to sin. Excellent. Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. So he's thinking in his mind, well, maybe I'm causing her to cross herself. And we know that Avodah Zarah, you should be as distant as you can from Avodah Zarah. So this is a very interesting question. I told him what I thought, but then I also consulted with another rabbi, one of the greatest rabbis of the world, the greatest poskim of the world, Rav Asher Weiss, and he, in a very short answer, he said what I thought was correct, that he doesn't have to worry about it. Bottom line is that he does not have to concern himself with what she does. That's her own choice. There's many different reasons why, but the simple reason is you're not causing her. You're not making her. You know it's going to happen, but she chooses to do that on her own. You're not forcing her to cross herself in any way. So it's hard to pin that as your responsibility. Besides the fact that, as I said before, when you talk about the mitzvot of the Torah, and this is a mitzvah in the Torah, do not place a stumbling block before the blind, do not cause somebody to sin. That's generally assumed to be within the Jewish community. That's between Jews and Jews. If you're talking to a non-Jew, so then it might be a stretch. Now, sometimes we do stretch, like we said about Kibbutz Avayim itself, that it's a stretch, but we do stretch that, and we say there is an obligation to honor your parents, even if they did not convert or if they're not Jewish. Same thing. Maybe there is an issue of causing non-Jews to worship idols, assuming, again, Christianity simply understood as idol worship. Can you take a pagan and aid and assist him to do his avodah zarah? Generally, we assume it's forbidden. It's a very strict prohibition to aid and abet pagans to worship their idols. So in this case, the logic is cogent that maybe there is an extension of lifnei iver or some kind of thing like that. But we won't get into now all the details of this specific law. Do not cause someone to sin. But it gets complicated. Kibbutz Avayim and Avodah Zarah, and it's in your own family. It's very, very complicated. Yeah.
Once we ask non-Jew to do something for us on Shabbat, that doesn't make a sin for him.
Correct.
Because
he's not obligated to keep Shabbat, but he is obligated not to worship idols. All of the non-Jews are not supposed to worship idols, even if they're not Jewish. So that's why I was saying it's a general principle. You're not supposed to, help someone. If it's payday, you're not allowed to have. If a Jew has a company and he does business and he completes a deal, he's not allowed to pay a worker of his, for example, on a pagan holiday, because he knows he's going to get his paycheck and he's going to buy some incense or some wine for his idol, and that'll be my money, the money that I give to him. So we try to stay away from that. We got a question here, Machon Meir. Once someone wrote into us. She was very concerned. How can I get my hair done at my hairdresser? Because she's a Christian. My hairdresser is a Christian, and I can't. Can I get my hair done on Sunday? So I pay her the $100 or whatever it is, and it's a pagan holiday. Every Sunday is a pagan holiday if you consider Christianity to be avodah zarah. And so the bottom line is, of course, it's allowed, and we all know that it's allowed because we live in with Christians for hundreds and hundreds of years. And another consideration is the Rabbeinu Tam, one of the greatest Balei Tosfot, said all those strictures in the Talmud against doing business on a pagan holiday with pagans, it doesn't apply anymore, even to Christianity. Even to Christians, not so much because Christianity is not avodah zarah in essence. There is another line of reasoning that says that. But he said it's because most of the Christians don't really believe in the theology. They're not philosophers. They don't really know. For most people, it's just it's keeping up tradition. It's culture. It's in America, it's the easiest thing to understand that it's business. Right? Christmas really is a commercial holiday more than it is a religious holiday for the vast majority of America. They're not really believing Christians. And so the language that Tosfot uses, minhag avotehem b'yidehem. So they also have a tradition. But it's a cultural tradition. It's just a custom. This is the way we do things, Okay, you go to church. Even if she's crossing herself, doesn't mean necessarily she believes in Jesus even. It could just be that's what you do. It's like, a lot of people have all sorts of superstitions. They have all sorts of customs that they do, right? Friday the 13th. You have to go. We're finishing in 2 minutes, yeah. But is this clock wrong, or what time are we at? 1:08. I have 2 minutes. Yeah, exactly. What? We have to get every moment that we can. Listen. So the Tosfot already said we're allowed to do business with the Christians. Most of them don't really believe in it. They're not really, religious. Might be different if you're doing business with a pastor, according to this logic, right?
With what?
Doing business with a minister or a priest, somebody who actually does. Or at least on the face of it, a lot of them don't believe in it anyways. Also. But the populace in general, you can't just assume that all the Christians are pagans and therefore we can't do business with them. We have to do business. We live in a Christian country. And until today, in America, there's no such law that you're not allowed to get your hair done on a Sunday. Because you're paying. Even if you know that she's a religious Christian, she does go to church, you're allowed to do business. There's other considerations that I just alluded to, which we won't have time to discuss, and that is, is Christianity forbidden? Of course it's forbidden. Is it forbidden for Christians? For Jews, avodah zarah 100%. But some people say, for Christians, the belief in the Trinity is not the same thing as absolute idol worship. It's called avodah zarah b'shituf. They believe in God, but there's also another element, it's sort of like joint element. That's another line of reasoning. And some people say that Christianity itself shouldn't always be equated with idol worship. It can be on a lower level of idol worship, which of course is forbidden for a Jew. Don't get any ideas here. But for the non-Jews, it shouldn't be considered to be as bad as actual idol worship. And it might even be permitted for them. And so for all these reasons, bottom line is, in this complicated case where you do have some element of kibbud avayim that overrides the suspicion that you might have of lifnei iver lo titen michshol, or helping someone do avodah zarah. The situation is that this should be allowed, but it's very complicated. But we have to learn how to dissect all these relationships and where the obligation comes from, both of kibbud avayim and lifnei iver and avodah zarah and the various forms of it. So this was a class about kibbud avayim, and I wanted to finish it by saying that for someone who converts, it's true that in most cases, if their parents were not Jewish, if they didn't have any Jewish parent, they don't have an obligation to respect their parents because they're the link in the chain. They're not the link in the chain to Moshe at Sinai, but there still is an obligation to honor and show respect and show gratitude for the tremendous investment which your parents made in you, in most cases, unless you're, some extreme cases of abuse or something else. But in most cases, so yeah, the general directive is you must honor your parents. And a lot of questions that come up about exactly how that plays out. It's not an official full-blown mitzvah of kibbud avayim, honoring your mother and father because they're not Jewish, but there still is an obligation to honor them because of the gratitude which you have to show them. We have to stop here. Class time is up. May Hashem guide us, and may we have great halachic poskim that can guide us in difficult situations, that each one is unique. Don't take this to any other situation. Don't try this at home, folks. Every situation, consult with your rabbi, and he'll guide you about the specifics of each situation. Seder, we'll stop here.